That's when I realized why these values were important to have, and these institutions were important to have, because on good days it's okay, you can get through life, but on the bad days you can't draw on your community or a belief system or prayer or anything like that. And that's where I realized something was missing, and I wasn't whole. And I didn't want to live like that. I didn't want my future to be empty in this sense.
Hello fellow leaders, my name is Prasad Vadlamani and I'm your host of the Indian Leadership Podcast. I'm delighted to welcome you to a very interesting talk with Mona Jhaveri, who shares details about her life, being raised as a non-Indianized American, even though she was born to multi-religious parents who immigrated to the USA from India. She poignantly explains how, in spite of having materialistic things, she understood the value of culture, belief system, and prayer when needed emotional support. She drew upon her multifaceted abilities in order to start an innovation-focused non-profit charity organization called Music Beats Cancer, which she describes as a healthcare upstream organization and selling innovation as a mission. This is a fascinating episode for someone who is trying to sharpen their leadership or wanting to start a new business. I hope you enjoy it. Hello guys, welcome to Indian Leadership Podcast. Today we have a fantastic and exciting guest I'm introducing here. Her name is Mona Jhaveri. She is born and brought up in USA, born to parents migrated from India. She grew up in a multi-religious family and currently raising one today. She is a founding director and executive chairman of the board at Music Beats Cancer, a charity organization she started after seeing multiple challenges she faced with the funding gap known as Valley of Death, where she was a founder at Foligo Therapeutic Inc., a biotech startup. She holds a PhD in biochemistry from Wake Forest University and bachelor's in biology from State University of New York in Binghamton. Welcome, Mona.
Thank you, Prasad. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's a pleasure. After we have our introductory call, I was pretty excited looking at your background. It slightly differs from the other guests, but still a very valid one, right? So you are giving a voice to the Indian leaders, upcoming and established leaders out there. So thank you for being the guest today.
Appreciate it.
I know you're born here, but tell us about your childhood in US, please.
So yes, I was born in New York City, and I grew up in Connecticut, which is basically the suburb of New York City. My mother is from a Hindu family, and my father from a Muslim family. And back in the 60s, they emigrated from India and came to the US. And actually, it was a time when Hindus and Muslims could not get married. So this was really radical for them to do. So they came and they struggled. I mean, they struggled to have this union, basically. And therefore, when they came to the new country, they decided that they were both of different backgrounds, different religions, different gods, different languages, different foods, different ways they wear their clothes and so forth. And they said, we're in the new country, so we will simply be American. Mm-hmm. We won't, in fact, cultivate our Indianness. We will stay American. We will become American, and our kids will become American. And so when I grew up, I didn't have a lot of teaching around these respective religions or ways of life. I didn't go back and visit India. I didn't have community or religion or belief system or even a God or any of that. We were Americans, but clearly we were not Americans because we were not white, mm-hmm. And it wasn't easy to hide that, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So that was the challenge, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, raising kids as Americans, I don't see that come across among too many Indian families, right? Many of them are
Yeah.
very hell-bent on having the strong Indian values or whatever, as if the other values are not strong. But so, raising as an American, like you said, there was nothing to do with India, but the dressing, any kind of Indian clothes were you wearing, or were you eating Indian type of food, or were you like completely non-Indian at all? So,
Completely non-Indian at all.
okay.
And what made it worse is that at some point they had a tumultuous marriage and they divorced. And that's when I realized why these values were important to have, and these institutions were important to have, because on good days it's okay, you can get through life, but on the bad days you can't draw on your community or a belief system or prayer or anything like that. And that's where I realized something was missing, and I wasn't whole. And I didn't want to live like that. I didn't want my future to be empty in this sense.
Right.
And that too, I'm walking through life looking like I'm Indian, but I had nothing to speak of, basically.
Right.
So that's when, as I got older, I went to India myself, and I started learning about my respective religions. I also did a lot of Buddhism and meditated, and I went to Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama's ashram is. And I spent a lot of time just exploring, being Indian, being spiritual, finding community, finding my own background, and starting those relationships, which became valuable, and just the exploration of it became something important for me in my own work, because I started realizing that I had to be multifaceted. Mm-hmm. I had to jump from one community to another and figure out what to wear, how to act, who to talk to. Just the act of wearing multiple hats became my strength, I guess.
Okay. As a child, who influenced you? Like, if there is no this Indian community to draw from, so who was your influence as a child, who helped you navigate some of those troubled waters, if there were any, or, what making you say, okay, this is the kind of education I want to get? What were the influences like?
Yeah, so I would say I was a quiet child, so I didn't seek people. I was probably like a lot of kids, just holding a lot of it inside. I was also an athlete, a runner, and there's a lot of mental strength in running, and sort of things we tell ourselves when we run, to stay strong, stay the course. So maybe from that of running, and I was quite competitive, and my running took me to the high levels, and that was another interesting, strange thing, because I'm growing up in a white suburb, and there are no Indians, there are very few Indians to begin with, let alone in athletics, let alone at high levels in athletics. So I was an anomaly in that sense. And I always wondered why, where do I get this from? Where do I get this physical strength from? I myself never understood that. But really being a runner was a way to deal with stress, was a way to find strength that then carried over into regular life. I also, as a teenager, my father took me traveling a lot. Mm-hmm. I guess education to me about the world, but also it brought a lot of questions. Like, we lived in a wealthy suburb. Why are we wealthy? Mm-hmm. Why aren't they? Why do we live in these types of homes and they don't? And because I got to see at a very young age poverty and sickness, and I had to wrestle with that as well as a young age. which also filtered into my ability to wear multiple hats and be multifaceted as an adult.
That's a great point you brought up about that. Many of us are tagged with like, oh, this is a model minority, people from India, they're always with high paying jobs and all that right now. But that's not really the truth, right? Like there are quite a few people who live just above or even below the poverty line. They are trying to eke their life, and the kids are living just like anyone else, right? Not everybody is in the model group. So do you come across that, and do you address that kind of questions?
Yeah, I think I spent my life, reconciling this a bit, trying to understand. But I guess my father, his side, they were lower to middle class in terms of economically speaking, right? Mm-hmm. And they did things that were odd, like, we would have dinner, but we would be sitting on the floor. We would be eating with our hands. We would be, listening for the call for prayers. They were conserving their resources in ways I've never seen. There was no refrigerator. It just goes on and on. And I think I learned to appreciate that just because people don't have the resources does not make them less, valuable, less interesting, less worthy. Mm-hmm. And that's important because we have so many people on this planet that have great things about them and we should be drawing on them, but they may not have money, but they have a lot of other things.
Correct.
I grew to appreciate that and to respect that and to understand that money is simply a circumstance. It's not the person, it's just their circumstance. Whereas my mother's side, they came from money. Mm-hmm. They, as we've been speaking about, my grandfather started Air India with J.R.D. Tata, and he was one of the first pilots to fly in India. And my mother grew up in great wealth. She traveled. They had cars, they had chauffeurs, they had servants, they had beautiful homes, multiple homes. I look at the pictures of my mom growing up, and it was amazing because my grandmother spoke and she wore pants, mm-hmm. and she hung with the Western women of the British Raj. They were pictures you would never see ever again, if you know what I mean. It was fascinating in that realm as well. And so the extremes of my parents were not simply differences in religion or culture. It was also socioeconomic. They lived in different circumstances, financially.
Yep. So, I mean, they probably grew up in Bombay, right?
Yes,
Bombay
in Mumbai. Yeah, in Mumbai. Bombay at the time.
Right, the Bombay at the time. And a stark contrast of different religions was also socioeconomic background. That could be a painting for a awesome Bollywood movie by itself, right? So, like, how did you discover or decide to say that you need to discover this Indianness as an adult? Like, why was that important to you?
Yeah, because I like I said, I felt like I was traveling life as an Indian, but with nothing to speak of. And when times got rough, in my home as my parents divorced, and I think the isolation I found was just deafening for me. It wasn't worth a life of this sort of emptiness wasn't sort of worth it. There was more. I knew there was more to life. And I knew I had a rich background. I just didn't know about it. Okay. And so, and I didn't want to have that life as growing up, in the future with my own family. Mm-hmm. I wanted to have a community and an institution that would guide us, whether it be in prayer, in celebration, in commemorating, whatever it might be. I found strength in it, and I found richness in that kind of life that was absent in my. So, as a kid, I knew that we were rich in money, but we weren't rich in other ways. Mm-hmm. And I knew that was not life I wanted.
We're going to talk a little bit about, your education here.
Yeah.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in the States, and I went to high school and went to college, and I guess I felt like maybe I excelled or enjoyed the sciences, which is why I took that on. I was a biology major at Binghamton University. It was really tough. And then I finally got into a program, a PhD program at Wake Forest University. And that was a biochemistry program that I ended up loving. It's very interesting because people say you need to be good at math and, science and math and so forth. But I think what people really miss is that when you get to higher levels of science, it's so creative. Mm-hmm. It's anyone's guess. It's how do things work? And that's what I loved about being in a PhD program, is that, in fact, it was so creative. Yeah. Trying to, and my job was, I was a molecular biologist. I was being trained. It was a new era of science where we were understanding how to clone and how to, work with DNA and RNA. And now, okay, we all talk about RNA vaccines, but back then, I couldn't even, it was like traveling to the moon, mm-hmm. but not really knowing, but not being able to share this universe with other people, because I couldn't talk about the word RNA or DNA or what we were doing or cloning or trying to understand molecular mechanisms of cancer cells. These were unspoken, universes that the regular public couldn't, didn't know about yet.
Yep. We will talk about mRNA towards after we talk about your organization. Yeah. And the woman who actually pioneered that, she was also an immigrant herself, and the kind of things that she had to face in order to be truthful to her work is also very inspiring. And we're all, billions of people are thankful to her for getting the vaccine out, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about your career, about any kind of role models again you would have in career, the mentorship, linear at all. But please tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think what was interesting is I was a trained academic scientist and groomed to be a professor of sorts, right? However, I got to the point in my own research where I realized I love the science, but I don't love the environment of academia enough to stay in it. Mm-hmm. It was powerful in a certain way, but difficult in another way, and very difficult for women, especially at that time, because not many women rose to be professors. And if they did, they had some kind of help in some way. And even for my own mentors were mostly men, were mostly white men, very few women. So that was kind of a turnoff for me. And that too, I was getting married at some point, down the road, and I was having kids, and I knew I couldn't keep that pace.
Yeah.
That was hard. And at some point I started turning my career, this is before I got married, and started learning about patents and how to commercialize science. Okay. And that I did at the Ludwig Institute of Cancer Research. I worked for them, but not as a scientist, but as a patent manager, basically. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I took classes at NYU, and I started learning about patents and how they work and how the patent office works. And I started becoming proficient at it. So from there, I then decided I wanted to start my own company. Mm-hmm. And I launched a company based on my own work at the National Cancer Institute. And the patents were already there, and I got the rights to those patents back. Sure. And normally, as scientists, when you discover it's not yours to keep, you sign your rights off to the institution.
Yeah.
But in my case, they gave me the rights back. Okay. So I was able to continue and create a company out of it, which was Foligo Therapeutics. Okay. And I raised money, and I pitched, and I won competitions, and I wrote grants, And at one point, I was a winner of the Cartier women's business plan competition.
Okay.
And they flew us to France, and I pitched there, and it was all pretty awesome. But at the end of the day, it was not enough money to get this company off the ground. Right. You know, I was raising, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but what we really needed was millions. If you know what I mean.
Right.
So that was, at some point we realized we have to shut this company down. I couldn't raise the needed money. And that's when I realized there was a fundamental problem. Because people like me with great ideas, we just can't make it work just due to lack of money. And so that's when I launched this new organization. It's called Music Beats Cancer. And it's for innovators who have something in their hand but lack the critical funding to move forward.
Sure. And
so we set this new organization up as a charity, where innovators or entrepreneurs, scientist entrepreneurs, could go out and raise a round of funding, a charitable funding, through the donations of the crowd. And so that's where Music Beats Cancer was born. But of course, the music part was strange because I'm not a musician. I did play violin growing up, but short of that, I'm not a career musician.
Sure.
I didn't have any contacts in that area.
Yeah.
But I had met some people in the music industry on my journey, so to speak. Yeah. And it wasn't unusual for a charity to align with musicians and the music world. So that's what I did. And it was funny because I had to network a lot to get some music people behind us. And I realized that people said, oh, well, you need a celebrity. You're a charity, you need a celebrity. But of course, I don't have reach to celebrities, and celebrities don't care, and you have to pay them, and there's gatekeepers, and that was hard. So eventually I met and networked with people who work with independent artists. Okay. And it was the independent artists that I ultimately championed. And I saw them as being authentic and caring, and they were hungry. They wanted to change the world.
Sure.
So they became a part of our effort, and we started growing an army of independent artists who could help us raise awareness and raise funds through challenges. We would do these fundraising challenges. So that became a very interesting / novel way to raise awareness around the Valley of Death funding that we were all experiencing, but then to do it through a grassroots movement.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
This term Valley of Death, is there something particular with medical or, kind of startups, or, it could be something applicable to any kind of startup, right? Like lack of funding. Yeah. And, a lot of people will be talking about, oh, this person is like, great talent, or they have great patents or things like that. But at the end of the day, a company taking off or not is truly dependent on the amount of money they have, right? True. So, and from that point of view, like, tell us more about that. Like, why is that problem there in medicine, if at all?
Right. It's everywhere. It's not just in biomedical inventions. It's everywhere.
Right.
However, the valley is deeper and harder in biomedicine, because just to get something in humans is a couple $1 million. And that's it. And it's like you haven't even started. You haven't even started to show it works.
Sure.
You're just getting it into a phase 1 clinical trial.
Yeah.
For a drug. And then the phase 1 clinical trial is easily $10 million. And you still haven't shown it works. You just shown that it was safe.
Sure.
If at all. And by the time you get into phase 2, where you're showing efficacy, you're in tens of millions of dollars. 20,
Yeah.
30, 40, 50 millions of dollars, depending on how big that trial is. So the dollars to get it, to get it to a point where you've proven principle, right? Which is really what any innovation is about, before it gets to the pharma or the bigger investors, is quite a long road,
Yeah.
and cash intensive, as we say.